Alright, it's been a few months since Jungle Cruise, and naturally I have an itch to talk about Emily Blunt again because that's just one of my favorite things to do. So I figured The Girl on the Train was a good target of sorts to come back to, because I did talk about it when it first came out, and now that it's reached 5 years later since it came out this month, I figured why not just go back to it. I don't know how many people would be paying attention to the fact that The Girl on the Train is having some 5-year anniversary apart from maybe Blunt's fan base. But hopefully that's who my people are. So that's the direction we're going with this. Because the original idea was I was going to do a book versus movie kind of thing, because I only just read the book relatively recently. But as I was reading it, I was discovering that the movie is an extremely faithful adaptation with very few changes. So a book versus movie thing wasn't really going to work. So I figured we'll just talk about just it in general, the book, the movie, and all that. But obviously, mainly it's just going to come down to talking about how incredible Blunt is in this, because like I said, I did talk about it to an extent in that video from 2016, but you could basically make a whole video around why this performance is so great, because as far as like, there's been a few times where I've been asked, what my favorite performance is of hers, which is kind of an impossible question to answer. Some days I'll say Sicario, some days I'll say A Quiet Place, My Summer of Love, this, sometimes even Into the Woods, or Your Sister's Sister. Like, it really just depends on the day, I guess, because she's just that remarkable and has so many incredible performances, and I didn't even mention The Devil Wears Prada. Like, that's how many there are. Like almost every performance she's ever given on any given day can be seen as like the peak of what pretty much any actress can do, since I do think that she's at the absolute top tier of them. But yeah, so what this was originally going to be was I was going to do it around the time that I think October 7th was the release date. So it was like just do it on October 7th, but then I got buried and stuff, and that came and went, and then the next week was my birthday, and it was like, well, that's perfect, do, like, an Emily Blunt thing around my birthday, what better way to celebrate, and then I got buried again, and then that came and went, so now, as of, like, yesterday, when I'm, like, shooting this, the news broke about the Nolan movie, so either way, it was gonna line up, in this way, and, yeah, I guess before we get into this real quick, yeah, incredibly excited about the Nolan movie and the fact that she is, and like I was kind of like, oh, him working with Cillian Murphy again, that's awesome, especially with him in a leading role, and it's like, oh, it's kind of cool, it seems like it's going to be something that's not quite, the big action blockbuster that he's been doing, and to see how he's going to handle that kind of material, that'd be great. But then this news broke, and it's, yeah, if there's one thing Nolan has been criticized before in the past, it's his seemingly inability to write women for the most part, or write them well, and give them, like, really good meaty parts. But there is Rebecca Hall in The Prestige, which I think is one of the best performances in any Nolan movie. And just the fact that Blunt has taken so much control over her characters and her input and getting her voice heard, and how, like, when she was doing the Stern interview for A Quiet Place 2, she was talking about how she's gonna bring that even more forward and make that happen even more, getting her, input and contributions out there. So pretty much anything she signs up for based on that, I have confidence she'll be able to bring greatness, or, like, drag greatness out of something that might be kind of simple on paper. We'll see, but I really can't wait to see what she's going to bring to a part like this. And it's the whole idea of, we have, like, Krasinski, and we have, like, Rob Marshall, even John Patrick Shanley, is somebody that has, these are people that have worth behind their names, but when you're talking about, like, the really, really huge directors of today, like a Nolan, for instance, it's like, I feel like we've just kind of been waiting for her to get one of those names. And this is a really good jumping off point. So that has me much more excited for that movie than I was ever probably going to be when I was I was intrigued by it, but now I'm like, I need this right now. So that's something that we can look forward to now. And yeah, hopefully the English is getting closer, and we'll have that as well. So yeah, thankfully we're not quite running out of material. But with that said, let's talk about a movie from 5 years ago that we already kind of talked about when it came out, but I would like to very much further elaborate on if I can. So I guess to just jump off from the book in general, I do think what's really interesting about this book is how much territory it seems to cover, because when we talk about what we've talked about so often, these movies that are coming out in the present day that feels like they're more suited for like the mid-90s or the early 2000s, where we saw these string of thrillers that just kind of came and went. They were like a little more than Lifetime movies, but they were like darker and had a thriller vibe to them. It might be more violent in cases. And this kind of felt like it fit right into those, at least by description, I guess you could say, and sometimes with the feel of it. And some people like to throw the adjective trash and stuff like that in a loving way. Like, trash sounds negative, but depending on how you feel about this kind of material, it can be practically a compliment. And a lot of people threw this into that, and I can get that vibe, but there's also a lot going on about how great it works as just kind of a murder mystery in general, and the way that it uses misdirection in a way that's like actually really effective. Like, I remember, like, I'm one of those, we talked about this with The Gift especially, the Cate Blanchett movie, where I had said that back when I first saw The Gift, I was able to predict the direction the movie was going by looking at the faces on the cover without having watched it. And sometimes movies can just be that, you know, predictable, especially if they're like a mystery type of thing. And oftentimes movies like that or stories like that can be very predictable. But I remember watching the movie in the theater and feeling like I had no idea who it was or where it was going, because it used misdirection so well, and all these characters they brought into it. Like, there was obviously the great thing that especially the movie pulls off is making Rachel look constantly suspicious, because that's the thing where when it's a mystery and it seems like they're setting up the main character, nobody in the audience is going to be guessing that it's the main character. So you like kind of just put that aside immediately, but there is that constant looming thing of the fact that she had been blacked out in that period of time. And I, not only through the story, but Blunt's performance especially, like, I always found, when I was trying to figure out who did it, I was constantly coming back to Rachel, which is something you wouldn't normally do in this scenario. You would, like, immediately assume it's not going to be the main character. So that in itself was a feat, but then you've got, if you look at the book, the fact that Megan is talking to us from the grave and telling us her side of the story up until her death, is very interesting. Like, when you're reading the book, you might obviously have to do this hypothetically, since I'd already seen the movie first, but like, imagining if you're getting Megan's perspective from the book, there might be some people reading that have read the book when it first came out thinking that Megan may not have been dead, which is very interesting also from the book's perspective. But then from both perspectives, you've got this character of Scott who looks incredibly guilty. But there's a lot of cases here where they kind of, it seems like they make enough of a case for him, particularly the idea of what he's going through, and what he was even going through prior to it that he didn't know about. But the idea of, through Scott, having this portrayal of grief is something else that comes through in a story like this, that another story that's more in that sort of trashy sense might not take the time to focus on. And there's something that Rachel says in the book where it's like, when she's trying to just fathom the idea of what he's going through after it's revealed that Megan is in fact dead, and she says something like, I can't understand how he's still breathing, how it's like, this should have just sucked the life out of him, and that thing where it's like you hear these tragic stories in real life and these news stories, and you wonder, like, how these people even go about their day. Like, even if it's like a month or a year later, it's like, how can you possibly live through something like that? And the way that it kind of explores that with the Ska character I feel is a really nice character, especially with the idea that we're still not entirely sure this guy may or may not have committed a murder, but we can still feel that empathy for a character that we're so uncertain of and kind of uneasy about at the time, especially with we're looking through Rachel's perspective. Um, and there's also the kind of ingenious detail of the Good Samaritan that's around this. I think I remember when I saw the movie in the theater, he was the guy I was kind of most suspicious of, where it was like, it really felt like they were building that guy up to be something, and it's almost kind of a twist in itself that he's just nobody in this story. Like, he just happens to always be on the same train as her, and he saw her in distress once and said, "Are you okay?" That's his only place in this story, but because of the events that happened, he looks like a major player from a distance when he isn't. So this is, like, from a murder mystery's perspective, this is really, really well written and set up. And that's the thing, is all these people and scenarios we've talked about, we're not even looking at Tom. Like, he's not even, like, the funny thing is, like, when you watch the movie back, or if you're reading the book when you know what the ending is, there are portions of it that feel so blatantly obvious, like, of course. But it hides it very, very well. In the way that they're able to tie in that it was Tom and how we got to that point, and how it ties in that he's, not only is he capable of that, but he's been a full-on gaslighter this whole time in a way, to where, because we're getting the story through Rachel's perspective, it turns out that we're not even getting the story, or at least portions of it, or we're getting reversed portions of it, and that's pretty brilliant from like a thriller perspective. Like, it depends on where you're putting the bar. Like, if we're talking about like a Hitchcock thriller, obviously that'd be one thing, but knowing the territory that we're in, this is really well done. But now I kind of just want to, talk about Blunt until the end of time. So let's do that. We'll come back to other things as well, like we have been doing in this little series. But I've just gotta gush about Blunt for quite a bit here. So just when it opens, and we see her routine and what it is, there's just immediately something heartbreaking about this person. Like, before we even know anything about her struggles whatsoever, just the thought of this person that has so little going on in their life that the only thing that gives them life is getting on a train from day to night and living vicariously through the people that she sees out the window. One couple in particular, as we know, that she has gone through the trouble of naming, and really just the way that, like, even taking her emotional troubles out of it, also, just the idea of how this portrays, like, how this gives us such a look at, like, a voyeuristic person, and the way it handles that kind of thing, and how it's like that this is basically all this person really has to live for, and when when something comes along that, like, alters this sort of vicarious life that she's leading, it's like, she just describes in the book, it's like something was taken away from her, and we can immediately see that desperation. But even before that, in, like, this first sort of scene when we kind of see at the beginning her go through her whole thing, even with the pain, like, just oozing off the screen, not just watching her, but in the voiceover also. Like, you would think the voiceover is just, some helpful thing to get you into the narrative, but there's so much performance in her voiceover also. As we talked about with The Wind Rises, how really of a talented voice actress she is as well. And how she can really make pain come through even when we can't see her. And that's coming in. But then, after that's been established and we feel, all this sympathy for this character we don't even know yet or know where she's coming from, we see her have one drink in this little opening montage. And we think that's just what at the end of the day, she has a drink and then she goes home. And then it's revealed to us what's going on with her in this moment when she's just sitting there on the train like she usually does, and then a woman comes up with a baby. And she acknowledges the baby, like probably most people would. But immediately, even though she's doing something very common and almost kind of expected as far as society goes, it's immediately obvious that she's drunk. Like, before we even get that cut from the woman's perspective of the bottle laying in her lap, there's obviously immediately something wrong when she starts talking to the baby. And to have that shift just by her, like, mildly acknowledging a baby, immediately tells us, oh, this person obviously has a problem. And the fact that it's not overplayed, I think I don't pay attention to anything negative that's in Blunt's direction, but I think there were criticisms about maybe it being overplayed. But I think I felt like it kind of crept up on us in that particular. It crept up on us, but also just completely blindsided us at the same time. It's a hard thing to like accomplish, and it's a very fine line between the two. Or they found a fine line. Obviously, they're two opposite things, but she found the fine line where it kind of felt like we were getting both. And that's the thing. Like I said, it's even hard to describe some of the choices she makes that she's able to just completely pull off. And then, and the idea of what we end up seeing doesn't necessarily have dialogue or even the narration over it. Like, it says a lot about Rachel's state of mind that we get these early glimpses of when she went in the house and took the baby and was standing in the yard. And the thing that it says about Rachel's state of mind is the fact that when we first see this in the movie, we don't really know if it's real or not. It looks like somebody's having a nightmare sequence. When it's clear later in the story, this is something that happened. Like, it just seems so outlandish and wild. And it's one of those things also where it's like, they're throwing so much evidence at us that Rachel would be guilty of something extreme. And the fact that the movie and the performance has us constantly questioning that and constantly coming back to her is that game that it's playing with us the whole time. And because I do like the way the movie set up how all three of our main female characters are introduced like in succession, with Rachel and then Megan and then Anna, and I think the book is back and forth between Rachel and Megan for a long time, and I think it's like over 100 pages in before we finally get Anna's perspective the first time. But the idea of it still feeling like we're like fully in Rachel's mindset. We get quite into Megan's also. But Rachel is where it's really where we kind of find a very uncomfortable home. Which a home, of course, being what she's ultimately looking for. And that's kind of the thing also, is talking about Rachel's state of mind in general and how far we go into it, to the point that it's like we live in there, is something that was kind of blowing my mind about what Blunt did long after the fact. When I was reading the book, I was still having Blunt revelations. And that is because usually the case is there's a lot in the book that has to be cut down in order to get everything into the movie. So there's a lot of character stuff that might be sacrificed, and it's like it's not as rich of an experience as reading a book and getting all that individual detail. And I don't think this is just the fact that we get narration, but just in general, while I was reading the book, I didn't feel like I was having any new revelations about Rachel that I didn't get from the movie. Like Blunt's performance and her portrayal in the movie feels so complete, and like they gave us like basically the full assessment of the character already. That reading the book kind of just felt like watching the movie again, and to think that a performance can go that far in getting you inside a character, like getting you into the understanding of a character, that the book itself, with all of its rich detail, doesn't have much else to offer on top of it. Is how I was feeling reading it. Not that that's a bad thing towards the book. I just think that shows how accomplished this performance is. That it basically felt like it got pretty much everything out of the book, and more than just the essentials. But like I was saying, there's also stuff that we get that's not just said outright to us, where we just kind of watch the characters live. And so, some of these just really, really depressing moments, like when Rachel's on Facebook. And like it's one thing that we see this whole where she goes by and she sees, Tom taking a picture of the family. And then it's a continuation of that where she goes back and she looks up his Facebook page and she sees that exact picture that he's just posted. And that, while that's certainly depressing in itself, and like I said, always has you questioning her because it's pretty weird too. Like once again, you're always suspicious she could do something extreme. Um, there's also just something incredibly sad when you look at the detail, where when it's like sure it's one thing. Like some people just as far as like the social media thing, sometimes you just let a certain amount of people in. But I feel like it says something in particular about the characters, where when she's on Tom's page, you'll notice he has like 140 something friends or something, and when she goes to her page, it's like she has like 23. And it's like, once again, that could just be it's only a certain amount of people she cares to have on there, but it could also show like how many people have kind of exited her life. And even more sad when you think about the fact that a lot of these were probably the result of Tom's gaslighting, rather than anything that she did. But there's also another detail here, where it's when you see obviously Tom's Facebook, or just when you think about Facebook in general, a lot of it is people with like pictures of themselves or their family, but mostly themselves, which is a really weird tradition. But all right, that's social media, I guess. Um, but there's that whole quality of everybody just being so proud of themselves and having all these things on there to show off to people. And when you look at Rachel when she goes to her own page, her profile picture and all her other pictures are just pictures of trees, and most of them are like dead leafless trees. And it's like it's just so de- like depressing in this way to where it's like, is that how she sees herself, or is that just all she has to show for her life, like how empty her life is? And it's just so fucking sad, like all the time. It's like every new detail that's shown about Rachel just gets more and more sad and depressing. And like I said, and it's this constant thing where you can be constantly suspicious of her, but you're also just constantly feeling for her, and more as it goes. Um, and that in itself, but as I was saying, we do also eventually get to a point to where she gets more and more suspicious, where like we get the whole I love the idea that the movie had, where in the book it's after she sees Megan supposedly cheating. Obviously we know Megan is cheating, just not in the way she thinks she sees with the psychiatrist. But when she sees that, she has this moment in the book where she's like saying to her, like it's in her mind, and she's saying to herself, and she's thinking um, that she wants to attack Megan, and says like she wants to like spit on her and scratch out her eyes and stuff like that. And to make that a moment where she actually in the movie where she actually unleashes that verbally. Not only does it give Blunt her big one of her big moments, um, but just seeing like really how like animalistic Rachel can go and that whole thing. Like I said, it does seem more and more obvious how it's like the way they're building up to like make her look as suspicious as possible. But the rage feels so. She finds that really painfully real territory where she's like on the verge of cry rage, where when she's building to that point where she's getting ready to just scream, it's like you can't tell if she's about to rage scream or just like break down and like just start weeping. And it's like this middle ground that's just wavering between the two, and you're not sure which one is going to come through, and it can be quite terrifying, especially when at this time we're not sure what the character is capable of, especially when she goes through these moments where she has no idea what has happened, all this lost time and all these lost memories. And like I said, this is stuff that could be criticized for being overdone, but I completely buy it 100%. And I think that's also they also did some interesting things with her physically, where, to my understanding, the author was thinking about Michelle Williams the whole time, which I can see, but I feel like I feel like Blonde always has a way of finding a bit more layers than most actresses probably will, and that's not even once again, that's not to insult other actresses. That's just how good Blonde is. To where I don't know that we would be as, like, I don't know that we could be as suspicious of Rachel and as equally sympathetic. Where, like, I feel like Michelle Williams might have been able to do the sympathetic really well. And while she has played, you know, really, really dark characters like the end of Shutter Island, the idea of the idea of doing the two simultaneously is something that seems really, really tricky. That Blunt pulled off in a way that I have a hard time imagining coming from another actress. And they also, I do know there were criticisms of this, if you want to really call these criticisms, the fact that she's too beautiful to play a character like this, as far as seeing the effects of the alcoholism physically, and the way that she's described in the book, and the fact that they something I never, like, you can tell her face is, like, somewhat different here, like if it's just like makeup or whatever. Apparently it's like prosthetics on her cheeks specifically, but there's still just something where she does seem constantly drained throughout it. And then there's like when you compare through the whole movie versus the very end shot, like the last shot when she's on the train again, she's in the other car and going down a different path, both figuratively and literally. There's something significant, like you can physically see the difference, where it does look like she's the different person that she feels like. So the idea of that physicality also from not just her, but also the people that did these very, very subtle prosthetics, something that I really didn't even notice until I read about it, which is great. But I do get that. Another thing that I actually want to praise this for, as far as, you know, what the character's supposed to look like and what Blunt looks like, is the fact that like that moment when we see the aftermath, after the moment she's blacked out and Megan has died overnight, and she goes home and she's pissed herself and there's puke on the floor and she's bleeding from her head and all that, and she's just this complete and total mess, like she's at absolute rock bottom. This is the point in the book where she gets kicked out, which doesn't happen. She, like, voluntarily leaves later, or builds up that she's voluntarily leaving later in the movie. But both feel believable in the sense that it's just seeing just this sort of grotesque place that she's come to, where it really could not get much worse. The only thing worse than this would be death, pretty much. Where, like, you're just... Not only are you just a complete shell to yourself, but, like, the idea of people in this situation with, like, addiction and stuff like that, like, everybody around them reaches the end of that, where we were talking about her minuscule amount of Facebook friends, and whether that's just her or whether that's an effect to what this is. It can seem like it's a cliche to praise, you know, beautiful actresses for doing for portraying very unbeautiful moments. But it's the believability of this rock bottom goes so far, and like I said, it doesn't feel like that's another thing also, where it's like, when you're like a big Blunt fan, you might watch a lot of like interviews and get this sense of like her real life persona and stuff like that, or at least the persona you see in interviews. Hopefully, assuming that's the real persona. We only know so much from this distance, but you get a sense of her as, like, the person, and it's interesting how even when a person this famous and has a very noticeable, recognizable personality in their own right as a person and not a character, typically it can be hard to get lost in characters. But I don't know that I can remember a character where I didn't completely see the character with her. And in this case especially, where Rachel just feels like such a complete and total distance, up to the whole thing that we talked about with Into the Woods, where these really weird coincidences have happened twice to Blunt now, where in both this and Into the Woods, movies that were like 2 years apart, she plays a character where it's practically a plot point that she can't have a baby, and on both movies, while playing these roles, she was literally pregnant. And like that whole idea of just completely breaking herself off from real life is something where like I never see the acting. Like there are times like this where like I really look at it to take in how insane it is that she can do this. But when I'm not like trying to break it down and see all the choices she's making, just to see just how impressive it is, I'm just it's just the character. Like I don't see somebody acting, and it's and there's even a lot of the best actors and actresses have fallen into that at some point. Like I've talked about, like a recent really praised performance was Margot Robbie in I, Tonya. It's like as incredibly, amazingly talented as Margot Robbie is. When I watched I, Tonya, all I saw was a person acting. Like you could really see Margot Robbie's wheels turning and not Tonya Harding's. I can't think of a single time I've seen that out of one, especially characters like this where she has to really break off into a different person. It's apparently, to my understanding, the character in the Nolan movie also, or at least the real life person, I think I read had like an alcoholism problem. So it'd be interesting to see if she can if she goes back into this territory in like the different ways she might do it and the different choices she might make, given that it's a different character with completely different backgrounds, and one being a real person while Rachel is a fictional person. That I think the whole scenario is like vaguely based on a true story, but like really, really vaguely. But obviously Rachel is a completely fictional character by all accounts, but has these very, very real problems that you could see in like anybody you'd run into could potentially have these particular problems, whether it be the alcoholism or the gaslighting husband or whatever, or just the general self-loathing, and it's which makes it really, really difficult to watch. And the more difficult it is to watch, the more the actor is doing their job, like the best that it can possibly be done, which is what she's always going to bring. And like I said, even knowing her personality and knowing that she's like one of the most beautiful visions in the entire world, you see Rachel at rock bottom, and you feel like you need a shower and you need to get your shit together just by looking at her. And it's incredible. And then the back and forth when we get glimpses of and the fact that it's gaslighting when you go back and watch it is just so. It makes you hate Justin Theroux because he was so good at playing Tom. Like I know Tom was supposed to be Chris Evans at one point. He had to drop out for another movie, and it's like, well, Chris Evans is great, and Chris Evans has played some sick and twisted characters like Knives Out or The Iceman and stuff like that. Just the absolute remorselessness that comes from Tom, where you can see the charm in it, and you can see where like he might have been a loving husband at one point, and then it's equally believable when we see what he really is, and it's. I don't know what kind of place he went to, but the way Justin Theroux pulled that off, like I said, Chris Evans probably could have done it to an extent, but probably not as much as the hatred that an audience can have for a particular character, which is great, and which is fun for an audience too, to hate a character that much, as long as you don't take it too far and like really start hating the actor. It can be very fun to hate a character as much as you can hate Tom by the end of this. And when we get this scene at Lisa Kudrow's party, the stuff that's only kind of mentioned in the book that we don't really see in full here, it's when she's like playing with the deviled eggs, and she does like this little comedy bit, and she says like the classics, like that's the kind of thing that you get the idea is like almost Blunt's like real personality, at least from what we can tell like through interviews and stuff like that. And then this dramatic cut where it's like a meltdown happening, and she like throws the eggs and stuff like that. And we kind of see that later also, when after she's like, she's either having just talked to Scott for the first time or is getting ready to. It's afterwards when she's talked about seeing the psychiatrist, and how she feels like she finally has a purpose, and we see her like in the bar playing pool and stuff like that. And it's like it's almost jarring to see Rachel happy, even though it's for this extremely unhealthy reason. It's like you almost just want to give it to her, and it's like just give her this moment. Like she's like she's found some sort of purpose and happiness. Let her have it at least for a second, because it's not going to last. Because this is a very dramatic situation in a very dramatic life that's happening. And the fact that, like I said, you see all this stuff this character goes through, and to want that so badly, once again, I can't stress this enough, while she still looks suspicious as fuck, really says something about how much this character can grab you, and how well she's portrayed. Because I think another thing here is that it's not that it's not that I think Tate Taylor wasn't giving her the room to do everything. Because if there is something that Tate Taylor has obviously proved he can do, it's these movies with these incredible performances. Like, I have not so high opinions of The Help, but if there is one thing you can praise about that movie, it's certainly the performances. And then, of course, he did get on up with Chadwick Boseman, which was incredible. And we've got Blunt in this. So as far as, like, you know, performances out of his actors, he's definitely great. But as far as, like, aesthetic, I was talking about, like, that idea of showing off, you know, like, as far as, like, you know, showing Rachel's life as far as, like, you know, seeing stuff like her Facebook profile, or when she has the baby and how it feels like a nightmare sequence when it's not, and to think that that's just how nightmarish this whole situation is, and the places that she finds herself when she's in these blackout moments. But there's also something in the aesthetic here that's, like, trying to handle disorientation. Like, putting us in, like, everything else has already put us in Rachel's mind just fine. But this idea of almost trying to make the audience, put them in this sort of drunk state, with how things are shot, and it's, like, really sort of viscerally and shaky and stuff like that. Which I do think is quite unnecessary, and it's there a lot. And, you know, we already kind of get this vibe of, you know, what's real and what isn't, without it being aggressive about trying to get the audience there. Like, it doesn't, like, it's almost like the execution doesn't trust the audience enough to already get that. When I think, like, just the scenes alone where Blunt has to act manic, I think put us in that place, that chaotic place, those, like, the camera stuff is, like, trying to get us there. I think everything else is doing its job just fine, and I think it's a little aggressive with the visuals, especially in, like, the tunnel stuff when they're trying to sort of shadow what's going on here, because Rachel can't quite see what it is, as she's really, really trying hard throughout the whole story to discover that rediscover that memory. But it's yeah, you don't quite have to do like Soderbergh's rule of the last thing you want the director to do is stand in front of the camera and wave their arms and let you know that they're here, is what that kind of feels like when a lot of the stuff is doing everything just fine. But yeah, going on that also, as far as, like, everything feeling like it's shutting in on her also, I really like the decision the movie made where we have the detective played by Allison Janney that seems to have it out for Rachel, like, from the get-go. To my if I remember correctly, in the book, there were the same two detectives, but Riley, the Janney character, was, like, the secondary detective, with the other guy kind of being at the forefront. But the idea to kind of switch that and make Riley the one that's, like, seems to be the one in charge, and she's the one that, like, really has it out for her, that was a really ingenious decision. In those scenes when Janney's confronting her, it feels like we're being confronted by her, because we're such in Rachel's mindset by this point. And it can be very intimidating, but once again, these scenes are also working. It always comes back to Rachel looks suspicious. And the way all of this comes together and always kind of comes back to the same conclusion, I think, is another one of the reasons why I couldn't let it go in my mind the first time I saw the movie, where it's like, yeah, it looks too obvious, but the way it's adding up just really, like, it's really pushing you in that direction in a really skillful way it might feel like it's overdoing it, but it's effective enough to where it can very well fool an audience or a reader even. So there is that. So I guess we're getting closer to the end here. Something I guess hasn't really been discussed much um, is Megan in general and how tragic of a character she is. Because of course, we talked about Rachel this much and all the terrible, horrible things that happened to her and all the ways that we sympathize with her as much as we possibly. It's like all like our whole like every inch of sympathy in our bodies is coming out for Rachel. There's also a murder victim in this as well, and somebody that had a really, really fucked up and tragic life in their own right. Um, Megan was another just one of these really lost souls that unfortunately went down the wrong path. That path, of course, being Tom. And the way Haley Bennett plays her also. Haley Bennett, when she was kind of like, like there was a point in time here. It doesn't seem like I don't remember seeing much about her lately as far as like really big standout roles. But in this era, like this area where it was this and the Magnificent Seven, like really close together, it felt like she was like kind of in everything there for a while. I do wonder if like the resemblance to Jennifer Lawrence had a lot to do with like it was confusing audiences and all these people thought Jennifer Lawrence was in these movies when she wasn't. But Haley Bennett really comes through with this also, and she's got a lot like that whole thing where we see the trauma past and present and how with Rachel obviously we can see like what a life might have been. And like the happiness she has with Tom, we get it in very brief glimpses, but it's there, just enough to kind of get both sides of it and see like what these two different paths could have been. And with Megan, it was just always tragedy, from all directions. Like even before her baby, it was her brother, and just this thing where we can see we can put ourselves in the mindset that Rachel starts in, where Megan has done this unforgivable thing by cheating on Scott. But it does it's enough to open your mind to the mindset that she could have been, the mindset that you can't even really put yourself in the way that we've put ourselves in Rachel's. Even seeing things, like even from the book, reading from Megan's perspective, still it's just like there's almost a distance because there's so much unfathomable tragedy in it. Like we were talking about with Scott and how Rachel sees him and how it's like you see somebody that's grieving and you can't even believe what they're going through and you can't even imagine yourself in that situation. And I feel like that's kind of how the reader reads Megan, where we can't get in her head the way we do Rachel because there's just so much unfathomable tragedy in her life, but there's still an emotional core that Haley Bennett found that she portrayed really well in these scenes, mainly the scenes with Edgar Ramirez. And that's really where we basically get to see her, apart from the scenes with Rebecca Ferguson. But as far as like her really opening as a character, are certainly the Edgar Ramirez scenes. As far as Rebecca Ferguson goes, there's not really a whole lot of Anna we can go on, especially, and she might also kind of be hard to relate to, given that as far as like seeing things from Rachel's perspective, it starts off with Anna having been the other woman, which can make her kind of unsympathetic from the start. But to kind of see how, by the end, how Tom is basically... Like, it's almost like everything was like Tom's own little game board that he was just playing with this whole time and everybody got caught up in it. Sure, to an extent, everybody makes their own decisions to some degree. But especially when you're as, like, impaired by everything that's going on with Rachel and her voices and how it's warped her mind and how easily it was able to... How that in itself makes it very easy to manipulate. You can really see how all the evil, despite, poor choices made here and regrets here and all that other stuff, it always comes back to Tom is the evil in this story by far. And seeing the way this plays out and seeing the remorselessness and even something like we see he has killed Megan, and we see that he has completely warped Rachel's mind into thinking that she's a worse person than she is and that she caused all these horrible things that she didn't actually cause. And sometimes it's just these little things, like when he sits down and everything's being revealed and he offers Rachel a drink. It's like like one of the most cold-blooded things that he does, despite everything else we've talked about. That might be a bit hyperbole because he did commit murder, but you get the idea. It's a really sick, fucked up move to offer Rachel a drink, especially in this particular moment, where you can almost see the gaslighting starting to set in again, and then eventually, when she wakes up, and the way he just talks so matter-of-factly, even when she's, like, fighting it, it's like he just... It's almost like you almost get the sense that even he believes the lies that he comes up with the gaslighter, and it's actually quite creepy, but played so effectively. And like I said, to the point to where you could see him as this over-the-top thriller villain, but the fact that there are Toms that do exactly this thing and get away with it, and they're getting away with it like right now as we speak, and it's fucking creepy. So with that in mind, we do come to this conclusion where she has no choice but to stick a corkscrew in his throat. And I do remember when I saw this in the theater, there was the moment where it's like, the whole time it's kind of like, Rachel being validated, and this is, what has always been happening, and Tom is this evil person, and especially trying to prove this to Anna, in these moments where Anna's the one that's like, is the most put off by her, and is genuinely afraid of her because of this moment where Rachel came in the house and took the baby, and seemed like she was going to leave with it, when that wasn't her intention, but still, extreme behavior that anybody would be afraid of if they were in Anna's position. But this moment when everything has been validated, and Anna takes this moment to see her husband laying on the ground with her baby inside the house, her husband laying on the ground with this corkscrew in his throat, and now that everything has been known and revealed, her response is to twist the corkscrew in further. And I swear to God, there was a group of women behind us in the theater that cheered, and it was kind of amazing. Like, it was just this whole group experience of the satisfaction of the conclusion this story was reaching, and how everything was out in the open. And that's the thing. This was kind of one of the big differences between the book and the movie, was I get it from both perspectives, as far as ending this kind of story. Like it almost feels like it's more real, the ending of the book, where after all this has happened and it seems like everything should be fine, the book seems to indicate that not only is Rachel still haunted by everything, to where it hardly feels like a happy ending, but the fact that this could go on for God knows how long, where it's just going to be this haunted feeling, where it's still like there's no sort of, even while it is also in the book that Anna, finishes the job, there's this indication that there's like nothing between them whatsoever. Like you would see it like as this whole thing of, oh, now if they have this in common, they could be like best friends or something. It's not that. It's not that kind of thing. There's no real close, like that whole thing that's in the book really goes into it. The movie, we just kind of see it in the background. The idea that when Tom is attacking her, Anna's just kind of having to watch it happen, and she's not making any sort of course of action whatsoever. And it makes you wonder what direction Anna's going to go in. Like, if she's going to defend Tom and stay by him, or twist the corkscrew in. And, yeah, so that whole thing kind of leaves, like, this real coldness and this real uncertainty, that just doesn't... But like I said, there is probably a much more sort of realism to it. That she would be haunted by this as far as seeing a happy ending in it, but... I do think, like, it's not necessarily... That would make it sound like the movie has a cheesy ending, which I don't think is the case. But it gives us just enough to where it doesn't feel... Like, it gives her that, I'm on a new path now. That's not overly happy, but it's optimistic in a way that the book's ending isn't. Not to the extent. And like I said, after having been through all of this... it does feel like we kind of need... Maybe I'm just too soft or something, but I feel like I needed Rachel to have an optimistic ending. Like, I need to know that Rachel will be fine, and by all accounts, the movie seems to hint that could eventually happen. Eventually. Like I said, there's always the case of relapse, and you're probably going to wake up in cold sweats for years. But to give the idea that eventually you could reach a point to where you'll be able to wake up and be okay, is something that this character I felt really, really needed. So I find that a bit more satisfying than the books ending. Like I said, I get, the bleak ending is probably the more real, which is very unfortunate, but that's the way it can go. So I don't know if there's anything else I have to add. So I think that's pretty much where I'm going to leave this, I guess. Until the next thing, which is... I'm guessing the next thing would be the English, but I may do something like this where I get tired of waiting and just talk about something else random that we haven't done like in the series yet. Like maybe I'll revisit Edge of Tomorrow or something. And then we'll just go from wherever that leaves us. But once again, at least we now have something new to look forward to on top of the English with the Nolan movie. As I was saying, still uncertain about stuff like Not Fade Away and Ball and Chain and stuff like that. Feel like I haven't heard about Ball and Chain for a long time. We do, it does appear we have confirmation on a Jungle Cruise sequel, which could be fun. It'll be interesting. I'm curious if they'll like bring Edgar Ramirez back or if they'll go in a completely different direction. I'm sure most people will think it'll just be more of the same, which it probably will be, but if it's more of the same of her and Dwayne Johnson's chemistry and just that character, like I was saying, Lily Allen's probably one of my favorite characters of her more recent ones, which says a lot. But I really love that character, so that excites me to hear that. So we'll see if that does end up coming to be, which I don't see any reason that it wouldn't. And then, yeah, we'll see what all else we have to look forward to. So until whatever the next thing is, I think that's it.